Snow fell heavy over Haven Ridge that night, but what Silas Hart saw at his own gate froze him more than the winter air. Two little girls in torn pink dresses, shivering in the storm, locked out of the very house that should have sheltered them. Their lips were blue, their tears lost in the snow, and beside them a loyal German shepherd pressed close like a living fire. What kind of mother could leave children in the cold? And what would a soldier do when he discovered the truth? The road into Haven Ridge was buried beneath a curtain of snow, the kind of heavy winter storm that swallowed headlights and muffled the sound of engines. Silas Hart leaned forward in the driver's seat of his old pickup, his gloved hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched with the kind of weariness that came from years of silence and distance. 2 years in deployment had carved lines deeper into his 38-year-old face, his dark brown hair now touched with strands of gray, his once light-hearted gaze sharpened by the shadows of battlefields far from home. He was broad-shouldered, built with the weight of training and discipline, but tonight his heart pounded faster than it ever had under fire. Because tonight he was not returning to a barracks or a base, he was returning home. Beside him sat Valor, the German shepherd, who had never left his side since their first mission together. 4 years earlier, Silas had pulled the dog from the ruins of a bombed compound overseas, where the animal had been left chained and starving. Since then, Valor had become more than a partner. He was family. His coat was thick and black and tan, his amber eyes burning with intelligence. And even now he sat upright on the passenger seat, nose pressed against the frosted window, as if he too sensed something waiting at the end of this journey. The town of Haven Ridge lay quiet, its clapboard houses huddled against the storm, the street lamps glowing halos through the falling snow. Silas turned down Willow Avenue, where the houses grew larger, brick and stone framed by wrought iron gates. His own family home came into view, the Hale estate, a mansion of pale stone whose windows usually glowed warm with firelight. But tonight, something was wrong. The yard was dark, the porch lamps unlit, and only a faint light spilled from the living room window. Silas slowed the truck, his gut twisting. He had pictured this night so many times, a warm homecoming, the arms of his stepdaughters Ivy and Wren reaching for him, their laughter filling the air. Instead, the world seemed frozen in silence, the snow piling high against the fence. Then Valor growled, low and urgent. Silas slammed the brakes. The headlights swept across the gate, and his heart stopped. Beneath the heavy branches of a snow-laden tree, two small figures huddled together, their dresses pink but torn, soaked through with ice and sleet. Their knees were drawn up to their chests, arms wrapped around themselves, shivering violently. Hair that might once have been neatly brushed clung wet to their pale cheeks, their lips tinged blue. Ivy and Wren Hale, only 7 years old, were abandoned in the storm. Silas was out of the truck in seconds, boots crunching deep into snowdrifts as he ran, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He tore off his thick military coat and dropped to his knees before the girls, voice breaking as he spoke their names. Ivy, Wren. My girl's Ivy blinked up at him, her eyes wide, glazed with tears frozen on her lashes. She was the quieter twin, often lost in sketchbooks, a child with a gentle imagination that tried to paint warmth even in a cold world. Wren, by contrast, was fiery by nature, more outspoken, but tonight even she trembled too hard to speak. Their small hands were stiff and icy when he grasped them, and when Valor pressed close, the girls clung to the dog's thick fur as if holding on to life itself. Without hesitation, Silas lifted Wren into his left arm, pulled Ivy against his chest, and motioned for Valor to follow. He raced to the porch, snow lashing his face. The front door was locked. He hammered his fist against it, shouting for it to be opened, his voice raw with fury. Footsteps sounded inside, and the door creaked open to reveal Delilah Crane. She was 35, striking in appearance, with sharp cheekbones, dark hair pinned neatly, and a crimson satin gown that clung to her figure even in the dead of winter. Where warmth should have softened her expression, there was only detachment. Her painted lips curved in something between surprise and disdain. "Silas," she said evenly, as if he had merely arrived home from a short errand. "When did you get back? Why are they outside?" His voice cut through the storm, his arms tightening protectively around the shivering children. Delilah shrugged, tilting her head with an indifference that sent ice through his veins. They were misbehaving. I told them to sit out for 10 minutes. Just a lesson. Don't blow this out of proportion, Silas did not argue. He pushed past her, into the dim warmth of the living room, and lowered the girls onto the sofa. His hands worked quickly, rubbing their arms, their small fingers, urging warmth back into their bodies. He shouted for towels, for hot milk, and when Mr. Whitaker, the gray-haired steward, appeared, startled and alarmed. Silas barked instructions like he had in combat. A fire roared to life in the hearth, the smell of burning cedar mingling with the heavy scent of wet wool as he wrapped the girls in blankets. Ivy leaned against him, too weak to lift her head, while Wren clutched Valor, who had curled beside them, his warm body a shield. The dog's eyes never left Delilah, his low rumble echoing faintly in his chest. Then Valor shifted, nose pressed against the porch door, and padded back outside into the snow. Silas frowned, following with his eyes as the shepherd dug at a snowdrift, teeth pulling free a crumpled piece of paper half buried in the white. Valor carried it inside, the edges soaked and torn. Silas unfolded it carefully by the fire. His breath caught. The drawing was crude, childish lines sketched with blunt pencil strokes. Two small figures hunched beneath slanting streaks that could only be snow. The house behind them glowing bright with light, its door firmly shut. Beneath it, faint letters spelled something like, "Out." Ivy stirred, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to notice the paper in his hand. She didn't speak, only pressed her face into Valor's fur, as if afraid the image would follow her into dreams. Silas's fist clenched around the drawing. He didn't need words. This sketch was confession enough, proof etched by a child's hand that this night was not the first, and perhaps not the last time they had been left in the cold. Delilah stood at the edge of the room, arms folded, her expression unreadable, as if she had seen this unfold before, and already dismissed it. Silas ignored her. He lifted Ivy and Wren into his lap, wrapped them tighter in the blanket, and pressed them against his chest. Valor circled once, then lay down, curled around them all, his thick body radiating warmth, his eyes half closed but alert. The fire crackled, the storm howled outside, but here in the circle of soldier, daughters, and dog, the world held a fragile refuge. Silas breathed in deeply, the paper trembling in his hand, and knew this was only the beginning. The next morning the storm had quieted, leaving Haven Ridge under a heavy quilt of white. The rooftops sagged beneath ice, the trees drooped with crystalline branches, and the pale sky carried a sharpness that cut the lungs with every breath. Silas Hart trudged across the schoolyard of Haven Ridge Elementary, his boots crunching over salt-stained pathways. He wore his service coat still, the olive fabric carrying the smell of travel and war, but his eyes had shifted into something more fragile fatherly worry. At his side trotted Valor, the German shepherd, his ears sharp, his black and tan coat dusted with snowflakes, and his amber eyes never leaving the twins. The dog moved like a shadow bound to the girls, stepping between puddles of slush as if determined not to let them falter. Ivy and Wren walked slowly, their pink dresses hidden under woolen coats Eloise had dug out from the attic. Ivy clutched her notebook close, head bowed, her light brown hair tied into two uneven braids. She had always been the dreamer, the sketcher of small worlds. Wren, slightly taller by an inch, had hair chopped shorter from an old accident with scissors, her defiant streak showing even then. She kept her chin up, though her blue eyes darted to every shadow, wary of disapproval. Inside the classroom, warmth met them in the form of Clara Finch, a woman of 41 with auburn curls that she rarely managed to tame, faint freckles dusting her pale cheeks, and soft lines around her eyes that spoke of both kindness and sleepless worry. She had grown up in Haven Ridge herself, daughter of a machinist, and had returned after college to teach because she believed small towns needed their own to raise the next generation. Years of listening to children had given her an ear for whispers that adults dismissed, and a sensitivity sharpened by the fact that she had once been a foster child herself. She knew what neglect looked like, even when it wore satin dresses and lived behind stone gates. When Silas approached her desk, Clara hesitated only briefly before opening Ivy's notebook. The page trembled as she turned it toward him. The handwriting was shaky, letters uneven, words leaning into each other as if the pencil itself had been cold. If we cry, we get wetter. Silas's throat tightened. His eyes ran across the words again and again, his military discipline warring with the surge of emotion. He glanced at Ivy, who sat quietly in the corner seat. Her small shoulders curved inward, as though shrinking from the world. Clara lowered her voice. I've noticed they come late more often than not, sometimes without a snack. They hardly speak. Children at this age should chatter like sparrows, but these two, they fold into silence. Silas thanked her, his voice hoarse but steady, and promised to look deeper. Valor shifted at his side, pressing a warm muzzle against Silas's hand, as though to steady him. The visit to school left Silas heavier than before. He led the twins back along Willow Avenue, their boots leaving tiny imprints on the snowy pavement. It was then that Bea McAllister, the neighbor across the street, appeared, tugging a scarf tight around her plump frame as she shoveled her walkway. Bea was in her late 60s, hair silver but still thick, cheeks ruddy from years of braving Vermont winters. She had lived alone since her husband died in a logging accident decades earlier, and that loss had left her both fiercely independent and fiercely protective of children she saw suffer. She spotted Silas, her eyes flicking to the twins, and something unspoken passed across her face. She rested on the shovel, her voice trembling. Mr. Hart, I don't know if it's my place, but I saw them, out there, nearly an hour, in the snow. I thought perhaps you knew, perhaps it was some strange discipline, but the sight hasn't left me. Her voice cracked and she pressed her mitten against her cheek. I should have come. I should have taken them in. Silas put a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm, though it wavered beneath the surface. You've spoken now. That matters, thank you. That evening, as the sky darkened into a violet dusk, Silas descended into the basement of the Hale estate. The stone steps creaked under his weight, the air below damp with mildew. Valor padded beside him, nose twitching, tail held stiff. The dog halted near a corner and pawed at something. Silas bent and found an old wooden board propped against the wall, painted with crude black letters. Time Out Zone. Nearby stood a half-shattered hourglass, sand frozen from moisture, but still a marker of 30 minutes. Silas's fingers tightened, the object heavy with implication. Whitaker, the steward, appeared with a lantern, his lined face pale, eyes wide. He was 70, with thinning white hair and a stoop in his shoulders from decades of loyal service. He had raised children of the family before Delilah arrived, had watched them laugh in summers and cry in winters, and silence had been his only weapon against the mistress of the house. Now his lips pressed thin as he extended a slip of paper to Silas. The ink had bled from water, but 3 words stood clear enough to wound. Wet equals remember longer. Later, by the fire, Silas unrolled the crumpled drawing Valor had carried in the night before. He studied again the clumsy sketch of 2 small figures hunched in falling snow before a glowing house. He thought of Ivy's notebook, Bea's testimony, the hourglass, the cruel slip of paper. All fragments, but each cutting sharper than the last. Ivy sat curled with Wren beneath Valor's protective flank, the dog radiating warmth like a furnace of loyalty. Silas touched the edges of the drawing and whispered to himself words that felt heavier than any oath he had sworn in uniform. This ends here. The storm returned with a vengeance on the night Silas was called away. Orders from Burlington had come sudden and sharp, and though his mind was heavy with dread, duty still held its grip. He left Havenridge reluctantly, his eyes lingering on the twins as they sat curled by the fire, Valor's head resting across their knees. Before stepping out, Silas crouched before Whitaker, the old steward whose lined face carried the weight of 3 decades of service. If anything happens, keep your phone with you. Record it. Don't let the truth vanish. Whitaker nodded, his gray eyes solemn. He was 70, frail in body but strong in resolve, the kind of man who had endured quiet humiliations because loyalty had once seemed like survival. But tonight, with Silas's words still burning in his ears, he found a new courage rising within him. Evening fell quickly. the wind rattling the shutters and the cold pressing against the stone walls of the Hale estate. In the kitchen, Ivy and Wren tried to help set the table. Their small hands trembled, and the clatter of porcelain betrayed their nervousness. A bowl slipped from Ivy's grip and shattered against the tile. The sound cut through the house like a blade. Moments later, Delilah Crane appeared, her heels striking sharp against the marble. She was 35, beautiful in the way of carved, ice-dark hair pinned with precision, lips painted a deep scarlet, her crimson dress clinging to every movement. But her beauty was poisoned by a hunger for control. She had grown up poor in a nearby mill town, raised by a mother who beat silence into her. The lesson she carried was simple. Obedience was survival. Now she repeated it, wielding it not on herself, but on the children entrusted to her care. She stared at the shards of porcelain, then at the trembling twins. "Out, both of you." Outside, Whitaker stood frozen, the phone in his pocket heavy with expectation. He pulled it free, his hands shaking as he turned on the camera. Through its lens, he captured the children being herded toward the porch, the pendulum clock on the wall glowing faintly in the background. The time was marked, unchangeable. He steadied his voice just enough to whisper into the mic. February evening, children sent out. Rain beginning. The wind had picked up again, carrying sharp needles of sleet. The twins clutched each other, coats too thin against the cold. Delilah's voice, smooth but venomous, cut through the storm. Silence is respect. Cry, and you'll stay longer. She shut the door behind them with a click. Across the miles, Silas sat in the back of a cab, leaving Burlington's military district. His phone buzzed. The message from Whitaker was short, but the attached video seared his eyes. He pressed play and saw his daughters huddled on the porch, their breaths fogging the night air, Valor's absence a shadow that made their figures smaller still. The clock ticked, the sleet fell harder, and then came Delilah's voice. Silence is respect. Silas's chest constricted. The cab driver, a young man from Montpelier with wide eyes and a nervous glance, jumped as Silas barked, Faster, Willow Avenue, Haven Ridge. Now the soldier's fists clenched against his knees, his jaw set like stone. For the first time in years, he felt helplessness twist into rage. Back at the estate, Valor paced behind the locked kitchen door, his claws scraping against the wood. He whined, a mournful sound, then threw his weight against the handle again and again. When Eloise Hart arrived, drawn by Whitaker's frantic call, she found the shepherd waiting at the door, muscles taut with desperation. Eloise, Silas's mother, was 63, a woman of quiet strength and weathered grace. Her hair, silver-streaked with ash, was tied back in a bun, and her wool coat still carried the smell of flour and herbs from the kitchen of her cedar cottage. Life had shaped her into resilience. She had raised Silas alone after his father died in a sawmill accident, teaching him that silence was never love and endurance was not submission. She opened the door and Valor bolted into the storm. Eloise followed, lantern in hand, her heart breaking at the sight of Ivy and Wren crouched on the icy porch. Minutes later, headlights cut through the snowfall. Silas burst from the cab before it even stopped, his boots slipping on the icy stones as he sprinted up the drive. He threw open the gate, scooped both girls into his arms, and wrapped them in his coat. His breath came ragged, his eyes wild. Delilah appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. You came back early, she said, voice light as if nothing was wrong. But Silas did not argue. He stepped inside, ordered Whitaker to play the recording, and held his phone high, the damning words echoing through the house. Silence is respect. Delilah paled, her painted lips parting without sound. Silas turned away from her, his voice harsh but controlled. Pack nothing. We're leaving. At Eloise's cedar cottage, warmth welcomed them at last. The fire roared. The smell of chicken stew filled the air, and Valor lay sprawled by the hearth, his tail brushing against the twins as if to reassure them they were safe. Ivy, still trembling, slipped a hand into her pocket and pulled out a damp sheet of paper. She handed it to Silas silently. The drawing was clumsy but unmistakable. A wide-open gate, a tall figure with outstretched arms, and beside him the broad shape of a dog. Beneath it, in shaky letters, Ivy had written, Daddy and Valor welcome us home. Silas's throat tightened, one drawing of exile, another of return. Between them lay the truth of what had been stolen and what could still be restored. He kissed the top of each girl's head, Valor lifting his ears as if to confirm the vow. In that small cottage, love fought back against winter's cruelty. Snow still clung to the eaves of Eloise Hart's cedar cottage. The morning Silas rose with the weight of decision pressing on his chest. The storm had calmed outside, but within him the gale raged stronger than ever. He had seen war, had stood in deserts and jungles, but nothing compared to the sight of his daughters trembling in the snow. Now the fight was not against an enemy overseas, but within the walls of Haven Ridge itself. He dialed a number he had been given by an old comrade months earlier, and within the hour a dark sedan pulled up outside the cottage, tires crunching over frost. From it stepped Anita Brooks, an attorney of 45, known in Vermont's smaller courts as a woman who wielded her words with the precision of a blade. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her brown skin glowing against the pale winter landscape. Her hair, a cascade of black curls, framed a face carved by years of battling in courtrooms, where women were often underestimated. She had been raised the daughter of a preacher in Boston, learning early how silence could bury truth. A brother lost to foster neglect had burned a permanent fire into her. That fire now drove her to champion cases where children had no voice. Anita carried a leather briefcase heavy with documents, but her eyes softened when she looked at Ivy and Wren, who clung to Valor's fur. She knelt down to their level, her deep voice gentle. "I'm here to listen," she said, and Ivy timidly handed her the folded sketches. The first drawing of two small figures huddled beneath falling snow, and the second of the open gate with Silas and Valor waiting. Anita held them up to the light, her expression grim. "Children do not invent this kind of pain," she murmured. Silas sat beside the fire, his hand on Valor's head, recounting everything. Whitaker's video, Clara Finch's notes, B. McAllister's testimony, and the suspicious outages of the security cameras. Whitaker himself arrived later that morning, his breath clouding in the frosty air, clutching a folder of logs and the very phone that had recorded Delilah's voice. His posture was straighter now, as if speaking the truth had given him back a piece of youth. Anita worked swiftly, her pen scratching across yellow legal pads, her voice sharp as she mapped the timeline of cruelty. She explained the process, an emergency petition for custody, urgent enough that the court could not ignore it. Eloise, standing near the stove where soup simmered, offered her own statement, her eyes fierce with protective fire. B was summoned again, and though she trembled as she wrote, her words were strong, describing the night she had seen the twins left outside nearly an hour. Clara Finch faxed in the notebook pages, each letter shaky but undeniable. By nightfall, Anita had gathered enough to file, yet Delilah did not remain silent. That evening, Silas's phone lit with a message. The words dripped with venom. "You've taken them for a night, but the court will never believe children. Bring them home, or you'll regret it." Anita read the text, her jaw tightening. "Good," she said flatly. "She's given us her mind in writing." The next morning, the courthouse of Haven Ridge stood stark against the snow, its brick walls glistening with ice. Inside, the air was hushed but tense. Silas entered in his service uniform, his posture tall, Valor pacing at his heel with a controlled grace, amber eyes alert. Eloise walked beside him, her presence like an anchor, while Ivy and Wren held tightly to his hands. The courtroom stirred as Judge Malcolm Reeves entered, a man in his early 60s, with silver hair combed back, his glasses perched low on his nose. Reeves was known for fairness, a man who had grown up the son of a factory worker and worked his way through law school at night. Years on the bench had weathered him, but also deepened his compassion for children. His gaze lingered on the twins, softening, before turning to the lawyers. Delilah arrived in a flash of red silk beneath a fur coat, her chin held high, accompanied by Victor Hale, a lawyer she had hired from Montpellier. Victor was in his 50s, lean, sharp-featured, his suit impeccable, but his reputation was that of a man who prized victory above truth. He had once been disbarred briefly for manipulating testimony, but his cunning had earned him clients who valued ruthlessness. Delilah sat beside him, her lips curved in a faint, cold smile, though her fingers twitched nervously against the table. The proceedings began. Anita presented Whitaker's video first. The screen flickered, and there it was. Ivy and Wren on the porch, their coats soaked, their faces pale, and Delilah's voice clear, sharp, unforgiving. Silence is respect. The room fell into silence so deep that the crackle of the old speakers was audible. Judge Reeves's brow furrowed. Then Anita produced the two sketches, laying them on the evidence table. The first drawing of exile, two small figures beneath snow before a glowing house. The second, the gate open, father and dog welcoming them in. Reeves adjusted his glasses, studying them longer than anyone expected. When Anita called Ivy and Wren forward, the courtroom held its breath. The twins were small before the bench, their voices shaky, but they spoke. Ivy whispered that crying only made the punishment last longer. Wren, fists clenched, admitted Delilah had told them never to say it hurt. Reeves nodded slowly, his eyes somber. Children may tremble, he said quietly, but they do not lie about cold. Delilah's lawyer rose in protest, but the weight of the video, the notes, the testimonies, pressed heavier than his words. Finally, Judge Reeves struck his gavel. His ruling was firm. Temporary custody of Ivy and Wren to Silas Hart for 90 days, with Delilah's contact limited and supervised by a third party. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Delilah's face drained of color, her smile collapsing into silence. Silas bent, gathered the twins into his arms, and Valor pressed close, his tail sweeping the floor once in solemn approval. Anita, steady beside them, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. For the first time since his return, Silas felt the ice within him begin to thaw. The apartment on Maple Street was small, only 2 bedrooms stacked above a bakery whose warm scent of bread drifted up every dawn. But to Silas it felt like the first true homecoming since he had returned from deployment. The space was modest, faded wallpaper of pale green, creaking floorboards, and a narrow kitchen with mismatched chairs, but it carried no echoes of cruelty. Here every sound was alive with renewal. In the mornings, the click of the toaster became music, followed by halting voices of Ivy and Wren, sounding out spelling words at the kitchen table. Their voices were shy but steady, as if reclaiming what silence had once stolen. Silas rose early, standing by the counter in his plain undershirt, hair unkempt, his rugged face softening as he watched his daughters laugh with crumbs at their lips. His heart whispered a vow each day, never again. Valor had claimed the patch of floor by the window, where the sunlight spilled strongest. He would stretch out his long, black and tan body there, one paw crossed over the other, ears twitching each time a sparrow fluttered outside. He had adapted easily to apartment life, though he sometimes glanced at the door with a soldier's vigilance, ready to leap at the faintest threat. For the twins, he was more than a guardian. He was the anchor. At night, when nightmares tugged at them, they crept into his fur, and he never moved, only wrapped his tail around them, like a second blanket. Silas spent afternoons at the courthouse filing paperwork, his military bearing lending him authority even in civilian halls. He had shaved his stubble for the first time since arriving home, choosing to face the fight clean and steady. Filing for divorce was more than a legal act. It was a battlefield of its own. Delilah's lawyer Victor pushed back with venom, demanding financial settlements. But Anita Brooks guided Silas through every step, her voice calm yet unyielding. Anita reminded him, "Evidence doesn't just win cases, it protects futures." Silas nodded, holding on to the truth like he once held onto his rifle in the field. In the evenings, Eloise visited often, her silver hair tucked under a knitted cap, carrying baskets of bread or jars of preserves. She moved around the kitchen with quiet grace, scolding Silas gently when he forgot to salt the soup or when he burned the onions. But more than food, she carried wisdom. One night she brought with her a small wooden box, the lid weathered but polished by careful hands. "It was their mother's," Eloise said softly, placing it on the table. Inside were faded photographs. Ivy and Wren's mother smiling in a field of daisies, her golden hair braided, eyes sparkling with laughter. Tucked beneath the photos were birthday cards written in her slanted script. On one card, the words stood out like a prayer. If I am gone, let love be the weather. Silas read it aloud, his voice thick, and Ivy's eyes brimmed with tears, while Wren clutched Valor's ear as though holding on to the words themselves. Silas framed the card and hung it beside the front door, so every entry and every departure would pass beneath that blessing. Life found small rhythms. Ivy began sketching again, this time drawings of Valor chasing butterflies in the snow, or Silas kneeling with open arms. Wren, bolder, insisted on reading her drawings aloud, naming each figure with triumphant certainty. One afternoon, she pulled out the old drawing they had once made, the one of two small figures in the storm outside the glowing house. Without speaking, she set it on the table beside the new one of the open gate. Father and dog waiting. The contrast was stark darkness and light, exile and welcome. Valor walked over, circled once, and lay down with his great head resting across both sheets. His eyes half closed, but his chest rose and fell steady, as if guarding the paper the way he had guarded their lives. Silas saw it and knew the drawings would be their testimony long after courts and papers had faded. He sat with his daughters on the floor, Valor between them, and whispered, "No one will ever send you into the snow again. I promise you." That Wren looked up with a spark of her old fire, and Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder, her sketchbook pressed between them like a shield of memory. Outside, snow still fell, thick and soft, but in the warmth of the Maple Street apartment, spring had already begun to bloom. And so in the quiet of Maple Street, a soldier, two fragile girls, and a loyal German shepherd discovered that love can outlast even the coldest winters. This story reminds us that discipline should never be cruelty, and silence should never be forced upon a child. Love is the true shelter that keeps us warm. What about you? Was there a moment in this journey that touched your heart most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like the video, follow and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story of hope, faith, and love.